A term that we use frequently, we use a term called golden time. And it is actually, in English, it's called golden hour. This golden hour was termed and established by Dr. Adams Cowley, a U.S. Army surgeon and the surgeon in the 1970s. And this is what he said. Says there is a golden hour between death and life. If you are seriously injured, you have less than 60 minutes to survive. And this 60 minutes is what he's saying is the golden hour that tells us how important it is to have this timing right and the time to live. And people live and die by this short moment. And the golden hour term accurately reflects or shows what a person's limitations are. People must live before they die. And when they die, it's the end. And you must board a plane before it takes off. You must buy things before they run out. The limitations are clearly defined, and that is why we race against time. And this is why we have to do it. And if you lose this definite time, then you lose the time. So that's why there is times to buy things. There are times that run out to do things. And so the limitations are clearly defined. And that is why we continually, and because they're so definitive, this is why we race against time. Jardius, the synagogue leader, faced the limit. And we see this in verse 22 and 23. And it says this, Then came a ruler of the synagogue. Jairus came, and seeing him, fell on his face, and implored him earnestly, My little daughter is at a point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live. And there are, how many times while we are living do you actually beg to a point on your knees? There isn't many times like this. There isn't times like this at all in a person's life. But a person's life, when this happens, this is when it is very rare, but it is an event when it blows out all pride, the sense of any sense, but you in humility come and doing this. And I bless that your life never happens to this. And this area, and the Jardius synagogue leader, he is actually a leader. He has authority. He has the authority and has been pointed authority. In fact, he can do things in this small town of Capernaum as being a respected person, and he has no need to be on his knees. He does not have to get on his knees before anyone today. And the fact that Jardius, as the synagogue leader and the authority, and his word has some meaning here and has the power, but we see a scene where he is on the knees and before Jesus. And Jesus, and when he was actually returned from from the Jordan or the Sea of Galilee, there was waiting for him, and he went on the floor, literally on the ground in front of so many people. Because this thing that he is facing is that this is beyond any ability that he has, any authority that he has, any respect that he even has. Everything. It is beyond the limit of what he is capable of doing. And his beloved daughter was seriously ill and was about to die. And he could not do this. And he said, Lord, can you make my daughter well? Would you please? You know why? Because he has heard the rumors. He has seen the performances maybe, or performing miracles of Jesus in the synagogues with his own eyes. Do you remember the person with the hands that couldn't move his hands or his arm? And so that he had the faith that Jesus could heal him. And he waited for Jesus to return in front of many people, and he knelt before Jesus on the ground. And Jesus allowed him, and Jesus granted him the request of Jardius, the synagogue leader, and they were set off to Jardius's house. And from now on, every second counts. And no one should block his path or interfere. And if you interfere somebody and in the brink of death, you're not even human to try to block this. But suddenly, a woman got in the way. To be exactly, this woman had never gotten in the way of a procession or blocked the path. She's never done that. But when he was passing her, she had only just touched the hem of Jesus' garment behind him without anyone noticing. It was just the touch. Nobody really noticed it. This is probably a big crowd. How can anybody notice? Everybody was kind of bumping into each other. But she touched Jesus' garment, the hem of his garment. And if Jesus just left, nothing would have happened, and there would be no event here at all. But Jesus, he stopped deliberately in his tracks. And this is in verse 30. And it says this, and Jesus, perceiving himself that power had gone out of him, immediately turned about into the crowd and said, who touched my garment? And Jesus, as he was rushing and is going through the many people, because he had to help Jardius, right? And he says, and he turns and says, who touched me? Or who touched my clothes? And when people saw this was a very absurd situation. Everybody was touching. Everybody was bumping against each other. And there's so many people bumping into each other, and it was really hard to say or answer that question. And who touched me? And Jesus stopped and looked. Is it that important? And the disciples says this on verse 31. Jesus' disciples answers this way. And his disciples said to him, you see the crowds pressing around you, and you say, who touched me? And do you understand the situation? And this is Jesus. Look, Jesus, there's so many people. This person could have touched, or that person could have bumped you. I could have done it myself. How do you say somebody has touched you? And why do you say somebody put their hands on you? And please don't pay attention. Let's just go. We're going to lose time. Let's continue. And this is kind of the tonality of the attitude. And Jesus continually says this. No, somebody did touch me. Somebody did touch me. And this is kind of the discussions. And this is just the frustration. He stopped on the road. It's frustrating to the disciples. And Jesus does not want to move until he knows. And in fact wants to find out who touched him, and wants to find who that person is that touched him. And who touched me? Who touched me? And it's getting serious. And the one woman couldn't actually hide it any longer, and she confessed. This is in 32:33. And he looked around and see what he had done. But the woman, knowing that he had happened to her, came in fear and trembled around and fell before him and told him the whole truth. And this woman told the whole truth. And what does Jesus say? And in fact, he calls the woman and starts to talk to her. And in fact, she must have known that Jardius, the synagogue leader's daughter, was dying. And in fact, she knew it. And in fact, Jesus is listening to her again. And what's her story? That this woman has been suffering from a bleeding disease for the last 12 years. This is kind of the hemophilia as we know it today, and no one can cure this. And in fact, she must have visited many doctors of that time. She must have considered everything, and she must have continually searched the cure. In the process, and in fact, when you're going through 12 years of this agony, you don't want to see people. Everybody, you become hateful of everything. And in fact, when she's heard of Jesus Christ, she had hope in her heart to meet him. And I'm not sure what the rumors of what she heard, but she renewed her hope. And what she had decided to do says, the conclusion is that if I could be healed if I just touched his garment. And the woman's illnesses was bleeding. You think that she talked it this way? For 12 years that she's been sick and that she's been impure? You think that's the end of the story there? That's all she said? And when you go into one of our deaconess, it could be hours before she continued or concludes. It's not anybody in our church. But if you get held by somebody who speaks a lot, you cannot. They continually talk and talk and talk. And I am so frustrated. I've been doing this for the last, and this could have happened. And she could have explained for 12 years. And I do not think that this is just a short synopsis at all. And I hope that you meet somebody like me, some synopsis. And this woman, and it's actually a disease of bleeding, and it's continual bleeding, and it's a person that cannot be in front of people, because if you go other people in getting or touching a person that's bleeding, they become impure. So she cannot be, and she cannot go to a large crowd. In fact, she was hiding herself, and that's why she just touched his garment. And she wanted to run away afterwards. And she wanted to kind of fade away into the crowd. And Jesus stopped. And Jesus was looking for who touched him. And she had to completely confess and tell us. And she must have been in great fear. And in fact, she was on her knees and she totally confessed to Jesus why she did everything. And after she says everything, and what happens? And he says, I'm going to take the punishment of everyone, all the crowd, after being revealed. And it is totally different. And this is in 34, what Jesus is reacting to her. And she said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed from your disease. And she knew she was going to get ridiculed by the people. But Jesus comforts the woman who was only thinking of rebuke and punishment. He gave joy to the woman and who was trembling in anxiety. In fact, he healed her, and he healed her from the pain. So why did Jesus stop in a hurried pace to go to heal this child and have a warm and serious conversation with this woman? Since this woman's illness already been healed. She has been healed. And she just could go. And she could have lived her life as a healed person. But why would Jesus stop his way? And why is he talking to her in this way? And this is the purpose of the ministry. And it was telling everyone that his ministry wasn't just about healing sick people. It is about the ministry to save. So that's to set people free from sin, from the slavery of sin, to completely restore as a child of God, to restore completely the image of God, to no longer deceived by Satan and bound and enslaved under their faith. And we just want to be healed, right? But Jesus is much deeper in her look and his scene. He wants them to be restored as the children of God. He wants them to restore the image of God, so there's no longer be deceived by Satan, bound under sin, and enslaved under fate. Rather, just being healed, it is actually be free from this bondage of sin. And rather confessing to Jesus Christ as Lord, trampling Satan's head under his feet, and so that they can live in the victory of Christ as the children of God. And this is the goal. And this is what Romans 16:20 says. And this is the conclusion about the gospel as it concludes. And it says this, and it says, the God of peace soon crushed Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. And it is the grace of God. It is the power of God. Satan's head is crushed under your feet, and that you can live as a child of God, and that you can live as a revived image of God in your life. And when we confess that Jesus is Lord, just to confess that one time to chase out demons and to be healed? No, it is to continually, so that we can continually to live by the word and continually prepare to live by the word, so that we can live by the word, so that we can restore the original intent of the gospel and be saved and as a child of God. If Jesus just had passed by this woman's illness would have been healed. And I think she would have lived as a healed person. However, this woman would have not lived by faith and the power of the gospel. She would have said, oh, I'm healed, and this must be amazing. And she would have lived a normal life. But Jesus Christ, in showing her that the living by faith and the power of the gospel, that is why Jesus called her and assured her that her actions were the actions of faith, and declared her faith had saved her, and that it is not healed by some touch of you or my power, but it is the faith that saved her, and he's confirming that in her life. This is completely different. And it is not some fate or something that just happened. I just happened to meet Jesus, so I am saved. But it is the faith that I have been healed. It is the faith. That's the declaration of Jesus Christ. When you look at this woman, she's been created a new faith. And who taught her that? And who taught her that if you just touch him, that she'll be healed? It was an expression of faith that she arose within herself. She heard the rumors, and if I just touch him, I'm going to be healed. And she had that hope, and she came and did that. And what this is, it is actually the creative challenge of faith that she would be healed, that she just touched his garment. Did you know that David's challenge of faith was to build the temple? He wanted to build the temple for God. And that is the creator that he had him, and that challenge that he had. How about Esther? The challenge of her faith was to fast and to go. And king wasn't even calling her, but he went there. And he says, once I wake up, I'm going to go to the king. And she risked her life, and she met this challenge. And this is the faith, and this is the work and the promise and the acts of God. When we challenge faith, and by faith in prayer, and when we are encouraged to do them, then we can express God's work. And when we just say, we went to church, I did early morning prayer, I came once, I did this for God, I must have served God this way. And this is not the life of faith. This is not the life of faith. The real faith challenges in believing in Jesus Christ, in believing in the promise of his living word, and then taking act and the thought, and it says, I'm going to do this, and in action, and in my business I do this, and I do this in my family, and in prayer, and I do this in faith. When you act this out, it is the act of living by your faith. And that is why in the faith that you have in challenge, and in prayer that you challenge, and when you act upon them, then you will experience the work of God. And this is the part of our church. This is the part of our cell groups. And this is the difficult times that we go through, that you have hope in these times, and that you challenge by faith, and that you pray, and you have others that pray for you, and then you experience the work of God. And when you look at in Hebrews 10:23-24 says this, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for who has promised in faith, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. And this is the cell meeting. And this is what we should do. And the times that we do, we seek God's, and God is sincere to us. Let us all pray about this. We will pray with you about this. And then it is sharing the work of God. And this is the testimony we have in our cell groups. And this is the congregational we should have, and how much work that the Lord has. And this is what a church is all about. And church is not, it is, deacon, I had something happen to me. And they ask about wanting to know and to make rumors, and they want to hear about the problems of other people. And they're trying to find problems, or trying to dig out problems. That's not part of the church. And there's so many people like that in the immigrant church. No, it's not like that at all. But it is actually believing in the sincere promise, and waiting, and actually giving hope and sharing. It's not just doing by yourself, and it is actually encouraging one another and experiencing the work of God. And I hope that you have this experience in your life, and I bless you. And The time has passed. Jesus was talking to this woman, the issues of blood. And what has happened? The golden time and the golden hour has been passed. Let us look at verse 35 today. It says this in 35. It says, while he was still speaking, there came a ruler's house who also said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? And their news came from the synagogue leader's home. The daughter is now dead. And it is you don't need to bring Jesus. It's the golden hour is gone. And Jesus is no longer needed. And that's the news. Please let him go. And because Jesus delayed, the child who was racing for every second died. And what Jesus did to the woman with the bleeding issue was truly a thankful thing. However, in the perspective of Jardius, the synagogue leader, this was such an outrageous act. How can Jesus do that when he knew about my urgent and really desperate situation? I was on my knees asking for this. And how can Christ do this? If he only had been cured and just let her go. And why do you have to listen to her whole story? And why you delayed all this time? And why did Jardius just thinking, was he not thinking about me? Was he not? Did he forget about me? And in Jardius, his heart, despair, and he must have had everything of daughter's death. The resentment towards Jesus must have been welling up within him. And this is a natural reaction, and we've experienced this in our lives. And there's issues, and when there's things that don't happen, we go in despair, and we pray, and we go into this same despair. And this is the same resentment that we all have. And how can Jesus do this? And this is not what Jesus is all about. And this is not what Jesus is about. But here's something that we must see. Where did Jardius' despair and resentment all come from? They came from his own limitations. All despair in this world comes from limitation of the one's abilities. Their abilities in the degree of despair and resentment varies depending on the limitations of one's abilities. Why did the Israelis grumble and complain? Why did they grumble and complain? They were saved. Why were they continually complaining about the desert? It is because their own limitation was clear. And this is in Exodus 16:3. It says this, and the people of Israel said to them, why that we have died in the hands of the Lord of the land of Egypt, when we sat and ate meat pots and ate bread up to the full, for you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger. Why would you bring us in the wilderness to kill us by hunger? It means that wasn't there. Where was all this? These complaints are all coming from their own limitation. And if they were in the wilderness, grab their own water or have their own or make their own food, you think that they would complain? It is their limitations. They knew they couldn't do that. What about if you like in a traffic zone and somebody cuts in front of you, you have this anger that comes up because your road has just been blocked. And this is the same thing. And even the most gentle, feeble person gets upset in situations like that. And if you're in line to buy this one product and somebody cuts in line in front of you, you can't stand that, right? Why do you do that? Because these are from our limitations. Your car. And because somebody blocked your way and you get angry, right? And no, and if somebody blocked your way, it is because of the limitations of you. And when you're in line to buy something and then somebody cuts in front of you, do you say, you're okay? I'm all right. Would you get angry? And all these things are from limitation. These are selections that we can. And if you had another route, your reaction would be completely different. It is based on the limitation. And Jesus becoming Christ and Savior is breaking all these limitations. He's destroying the power of sin. He's destroying the power of death. He's destroying the Satan's hand and breaking the limitations of all these things. And this means that breaking the shackles and traps and the prisoners that we have of thinking of faith, curses, addiction, hell, ignorance, incompetence, and all the wrong thinking that we have. So when we confess that Jesus is Christ and Lord of our lives, that we are now within the limitation of our own thinking, that we are confessing that we're not going to be trapped in this situation, in this environment any longer, and that we confess that Jesus has accomplished everything on the cross and makes our choice of faith and casts out all these things. It is not from our frustrations, our situations, and it's not our power, but it is the power of the cross. And through that power and authority and seeing that, and that we're going to go in that situation and cast and base it on that word, and that we're going to base it on faith. And this is based on his word. And we're going to cast that net into the ocean. So why did God say to the Israelis, and he sent them out to the wilderness, and what did he say? What did he say? He says, I will be with you. I will go with you. He didn't say anything else. He says, I will be with you. He didn't say anything else. And what this means is that in the wilderness, that all the limitations that you may see, I'm going to break those boundaries that you think that you have had. And this is in Isaiah 43:18 through 19. It says this, remember not the former things, nor consider things of old. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now a spring forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and the river in the desert. And how do you make a road in the desert and a river into the desert? It means that all the despair, all the things that you think that are limitations have been broken. And so when Jardius, the synagogue leader, heard that his daughter had died, he completely confined within his boundaries. And it is done. He fell into despair. She is dead. And he was confined to that. And this is what Satan does to us. And he continually bounds us in our own boundaries. Hey, you can't do this. Your daughter is dead. You can't do anything now. And this is the message that Satan continually, and it bounds our thoughts and limits our thinking. However, what does Jesus does? And he pulls Jardius out of the boundary. And he takes him out of his boundaries. And this is in verse 36. And it says this, but overhearing what they have said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. Only believe. And he was in despair. And he says, it's okay. You don't have to be afraid. Just lifted him out of his boundary. And he lifted it. And he's taking him to his house. Let's go to your house. And as he arrived at the scene, and they try to confine him back into the boundary again. And this is in verse 38. And this is in verse 38 today. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue. And Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and rounding out loud. And people are saying, it's all dead. They were mourning, they were yelling. And they're saying, what do we do? And Jesus saw this. And what about the heart of Jardius? He came to here, and he's now going back into that despair and that boundary back again. And Jesus again takes him back out of the boundary. And this is in 41. And it says this. It says, taking his hand, this girl is just sleeping. It says, don't worry. She's just in sleep. This child was asleep. It says, then everybody's saying, how can that be? And this is what was happening back and forth in the life of Jardius, the leader. He was believing, he was back in despair, and it's kind of like that. And it was like that as going back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And this is a continual thing that is happening. And Jardius, wasn't he not in his faith confess? He was on his knees and says, Lord, you could help me. And this is the confession of faith, right? And that has to be healed. But he was going in here, he was going out of the boundary, he's going into the boundary of despair, back and forth. And all these things that Jesus declared. And let's look at 41 and 42 today. It says this, taking her hand, and it said to her, Tilalama kumai means, little girl, says to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, and she was 12 years old, and they were increasingly overcome in amazement. And Jesus took her hand and says, little girl, stand up, live. And she stand up. And Jesus said, eat, take her and eat, let her eat something. And she ate. And Jesus, seeing Tardius in the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and from that scene to this scene, he came in Jesus by faith. That Jesus is that you are the Christ, you are the Lord. And what happens here? And on the way, there was opposition, there was delay, there was despair. And Jesus takes him out of his despair. And he goes to her home, and everybody was in despair. He's back in despair. And he was continually repeating this back and forth. And he continually overcomes these boundaries. And Jesus takes him out. And he confesses Jesus is Lord. And he sees the life of daughter coming back. And this is the life of the faith and the power that we have and we witness. And from the time that we confess Jesus is Lord, that's not the end. From that time forward, we continually go into despair, and then it becomes the life of that we get pulled back by faith, by Christ, and then things that we still want to do something in despair, and then we go into this boundary and we're pulled back out. What do we do in those times? We confess that Jesus is Lord, and we overcome them, and we overcome these boundaries again, and we confess with our lips, and we have to get out of those. We can't stay in that boundary, and if it comes to us and that we get in, and the fear and the anxieties and the frustration, who is doing that? It is actually Satan trying to do that. How do we get out of there? That Jesus is Lord, we confess, and then we overcome that and get out of those boundaries by faith. And we come in, go in and come in, go in and come in, and we continue to repeat this process in our lives. And so that someone's faith in life and in that process, if he says, I have never been in despair, I've never had no doubt in my faith, that is not true. And even the most people that you had the greatest faith in, they can disappoint you. And you overcoming that, and through the word, and even other people do that. You think that it's not going to happen to you, but you see it all around. And this is the life of the faith. So what do we have to do when we're falling into these boundaries? We have to confess that Jesus is Lord. And we must stand and get out of these boundaries. And what this means is, this is what it means to confess that Jesus is Christ and Lord. It is to believe what Jesus has accomplished on the cross, and we ask for help from Jesus and overcoming with Jesus. It is to endure and overcome the opposition and difficulties that rise in the process of solving the problems by confessing Jesus Christ as Lord. And this is how we live and accomplish what Jesus has done. And this is the power of living in the gospel and the salvation. And God's work is not done in the power of wealth, time, or urgency. It is done in the order of faith. And it says he didn't say, I'm going to meet, I'm going to go to Jardius first, woman. I'm going to heal you later. It wasn't that. It was according to the declaration of faith, and continually with Jesus Christ lifting yourself out of the boundary. And I bless you that you can do this in the problems and the faith that you have in Jesus' name. Let us all sing together.